Hello, colleagues who are debaters in the Houston area or anybody else who is watching this channel. I am coming to you on the 26th of November. That's a Tuesday, and I want to talk about some current issues that are born out of the current impeachment inquiry that have to do with your policy debate topic this year. They involve the Office of Management and Budget and something called the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Now, let's just say that you haven't had time to watch all of the impeachment hearings that were on TV all of last week, nor have you had time to read the transcripts that have been released over the last week or two. I want to point you to some stuff. Testimony from Laura Cooper, testimony from Mark Sandy. You have somebody that's in the DOD and somebody that's in the OMB. DOD, Department of Defense, OMB, Office of Management and Budget. What has emerged in recent hearings is the fact that when President Trump put a hold on aid to Ukraine, that was going to be about $390 million, that process had already been ratified not only by the Senate and the House, but by the Department of Defense and the Department of State. And in the period around late July, the President decided to put a hold on that assistance until he could get what he wanted. I'll just put it that way. You know the story there. The President wanted to investigate the Bidens and to prop up a conspiracy theory, a bogus conspiracy theory about Ukraine being behind the sabotage of our electoral system, not Russia. Now, here's the deal. In the ordinary course of business, after the Senate and the House approve something, and after the DOD and the Department of State sign off, that is essentially end of ball game. The President does have the authority to withhold things in the form of aid as long as he provides a justification to Congress or to the regulatory agency, Office of Management and Budget, that explains why he is doing it. You will recall, or if you didn't know this already, you will now recall, that the first thing the President said and his administration's spokespersons said was that Ukraine aid was being held up in conjunction with a, generally speaking, wide range of reviews of foreign aid. That turns out to be a lie, okay? Especially given the testimony today that was released today from Mr. Sandy. And you can look these things up, by the way. All you have to do is put into Google, the transcript for Cooper or the transcript for Sandy, and you will get them there. And there are a couple of other people I could mention, but we're going to focus here for just a moment. The point being that, according to Mr. Sandy, nobody gave him a justification, a rationale for why aid was being held up until September, okay? When the fiscal year was about to expire. So, what you have is a situation where Congress is being sidetracked without anybody giving a justification. I want to point you to several things in the news lately. One, a New York Times story from just a few days ago. Mulvaney asked about legal justification for withholding Ukraine aid. In other words, the President's Chief of Staff went to OMB, where he used to have hangers on, and said, how are we going to justify this? Because, as we said during the summer camp, when we took a look at the legislation about foreign military assistance and the provision of arms to other governments, we looked at some of the core legal prescriptions that govern our our export of arms sales and arms assistance and military assistance to other countries, and we looked at who gets to decide, who gets to authorize, who gets to interpose their thoughts, etc. Nowhere in the discussions I oversaw this summer did we talk about the role of the OMB or the Impoundment Act from 1974, because that's not how it is done. So in this case you have, according to the New York Times article a few days ago, Mulvaney asking people that used to work with him, how are we going to justify this? Because it wasn't something that could easily be justified. Then go to a Washington Post article a couple of days ago. White House review shows extensive effort to justify Trump's decision to block Ukraine aid. Why? They don't have a legal basis for doing this. They don't have a rationale that stands up. It is, as all of these witnesses that know something about this have said, this is not how we do things. This is kind of out of the ordinary. So if you want to look a little bit further, go to a Wikipedia article on the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. This came about in the wake of Watergate, because at a certain point, President Nixon decided he was going to take congressionally authorized funds and use them for his ends. Does that sound familiar? Ha 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 ha! Yeah, it does. Okay, so the whole point about all of this is you have two things, an inherency argument and a solvency argument. Inherency argument. The President of the United States at this point, who has a Buy American, he's talking about arms, Buy American policy, doesn't give an expletive about what the laws are. He just is going to do what he wants. So that's how you use this information on the affirmative to say there is an inherent problem as long as Mr. Such and Such is president, because he doesn't care about what the law says. But it's more important on the other side of the button, solvency. How do you enforce a law, a new policy that has some administrative provisions to make sure it gets enforced, when somebody who is being overseen by that law, whose actions are being overseen, refuses to comply with laws? Okay? Now, some of you will say, but wait. This is a case where Trump was decreasing U.S. arms sales in this case, in that he held them up for this long period of time. Now, that's true. In this particular case, he was not increasing arms sales to Ukraine. But we have already talked about it, especially in the last episode of this dialogue with you guys and gals. We have talked about the fact that in, for example, Saudi Arabia, he went ahead and carried through with arms sales that Congress said, no, 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 no. And he just said, yes, I will. Yes, I will. In the dead of night while you're not looking, and I don't care. I'm just going to do it anyway. So the point from a solvency standpoint is, whether it's increasing arms sales or decreasing them, if you have somebody who thinks he's not bound by the laws, he can circumvent. And the evidence of how Donald Trump has circumvented all of the legal restrictions upon him will go to the issue of solvency, even more than it goes to the issue of inherency. So I just want you to be aware of all of that. I want you to think about Cooper's testimony and Sandy's testimony, and also the Impoundment Control Act, because we didn't discuss that at the summer camp, and we didn't put it in the raw evidence file because nobody expects the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, to be the last word on this kind of subject. But in this case, it was the second to last on the subject until everything got exposed in the newspapers, at which point Trump backed out of his position and then started trying to justify it with all sorts of flim-flam, absurdly hallucinatory arguments. All of that being said, I will post to the evidence file by the time that you look at this, and you should have a link to the evidence file as well. I will post something on the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act, but you can look it up on Wikipedia, or you can look at more sources if you want. This was not intended to be in that section on, the legal basis, but now it is because of events. And secondly, I'm going to post a number of articles, at least a dozen articles about cybersecurity, because even though I have yet to judge a policy debate where somebody runs an affirmative that talks about cybersecurity, offense or defense, as a arms kind of sale, something that we provide to other governments, I have a feeling it's coming up at some point. So even if you don't plan to run such an affirmative, you might want to look through some of these articles about cybersecurity so that you know general background about it and can create a negative proposition on cybersecurity as arms sales if you are put in the position of suddenly having to vie against such an affirmative. Until your next tournament, I hope you're all having a good time, a good holiday season. I wish you the best for whatever tournaments you're going to in December, and I'll be again with you when the time comes.